say this. So to everyone here, everyone online, good morning and welcome back to church. Excited y'all are here. Hope y'all are ready. You guys ready? Come on, you have to do better than that. Y'all ready? All right, let's do this. Amen? You guys have a quick seat. Good morning, church. It's good to see you guys again. Apparently, Yvette and I are out of practice at church because we got on stage way too soon, and that's okay. We haven't heard songs sang in a while, so hey, good morning. It's very good to see you. Happy to be back in the building. Happy to see you guys again. We want to thank everybody who put in so much time and so much effort to make us help us redo this room. It looks pretty good, right? Yeah, it's pretty nice. Awesome. It's good to see you guys, and Yvette and I have just a few announcements for you real quick.
All right, well, we're excited to be reopening, and we're going to be reopening a couple of ministries. So one of the first ones to open up is our small groups ministry. So our small groups have started to kind of gather. Some are meeting back in the building. Some have met in the church parking lot and parks. Some are venturing into homes already. So we're slowly opening that back up. So if you want information on how to kind of get plugged into a small group, this is a great time. You can actually email us at smallgroups@fairmontpark.org. We'll kind of get you connected if that's something that you're interested in. I don't know about you, but my schedule before COVID was, it felt like we had something every night of the week, and then COVID hit and we went to having nothing during the week, and now I'm rebuilding a new schedule, and this is a neat opportunity maybe to create a new rhythm in your life. So think about that as you're opening, as things begin to open up.
Fantastic. So look, this is what I want you to do. Pull out your phone. Everybody, you pull out your phone. I know it's church. You're back. Church is not different, you know. You have your phone out, right? No? Anyway, pull out your phone. So look, right now we're having a barbecue fundraiser for our youth. They're going to camp. Camp got postponed this year for a couple weeks, and so we had a little bit of a window here that we could do it in. So if you would, invite someone to come pick up a plate. We're selling barbecue plates for $10 a piece. Come pick up a plate. We're going to have tables set up outside, drinks set up outside. If you want to sit and you want to talk to people you haven't seen in a little while, sit and talk with them and enjoy. But please invite someone to come pick up a plate to go. We made we made a dozen briskets, and we want to just sell out of them, and we can help kids and help their parents with camp costs.
Awesome. Also outside, kiddos are near the worship center. We have our FP Kids activity bags for you to pick up after service. Mr. Justin, Ms. Nicole will be out there. So lots of good stuff, but it's all outside. So we are going to pray. We're going to get started with worship. Why don't you go ahead and stand up, church? I'm going to pray, and then we're going to continue with worship this morning. God, we just thank you for this day, Lord. I thank you, God, that we can just gather in our buildings again and worship together as a church family. God, I guess I'm just reminded that, you know, worship isn't an event. This isn't a performance, God, that we're doing, God. This is, we worship you because you're a good God. You love us. I'm blown away by your mercy and your goodness and your grace and your forgiveness, God. We worship you, God, this morning. God, we don't worship you because we had a good week, because everything went well. That's not why we worship you. We worship you because you are our Heavenly Father. You are our King. You are our Lord. And I pray right now that our hearts and our eyes and just our posture, God, would just be just a time of worship and glorify you. Lord, we thank you for this day. Amen.
reference someone whom I didn't know their name. And they're like, well, they sit in that section. And I'm like, dude, it's been like 2 months. I don't remember who sat in that section. But it's really good to see you guys. I think some of you are messing me up just by shuffling seats a little bit. That's okay. You know, when we started this whole bit, it was important for me as a worship leader to tell myself and to think about for our team and for you guys that it's okay for you to worship in your living room and in your couch. Or that you didn't have to be in this room. But there is something really amazing about gathering together in the name of Jesus. Just proclaiming His goodness and proclaiming His faithfulness. When He shows up and He's with us, and His presence is obvious, there's nothing better than that. So I kind of picked this song so that we can sort of jumpstart getting over that awkward hurdle that might be this moment. And we might see masks, and that's okay. And we might sit further apart, and that's okay. But regardless, we gather together in the name of Christ. We do it because we believe He is who He is. Let's sing this together. And I'm caught up in your presence, and I just want to sit here at your feet. I'm caught up in this holy moment, and I never want to leave. And I'm not here for blessing. Well, Jesus, you don't owe me anything. And more than anything that you've had, I just want you. And I'm sorry, we'll just stomp through the motions. I'm sorry, we'll just sing another song. So take me back to where we started, when I open up my heart to you. And I'm sorry when I've come with my agenda. I'm sorry when I forgot your love. So take me back to where it started, when I opened up my heart to you. And I'm caught up in your presence. I just want to sit here at your feet. I'm caught up in this holy moment, and I never want to leave. And I'm not here for blessing. And Jesus, you don't owe me anything. And more than anything that you can do, oh, I just want you. Oh, I just want you, and nothing else. Oh, and nothing else, and nothing else will do. And I just want you, and nothing else, and nothing else, and nothing else will do. Sing it with us. Oh, I just want you. nothing else will do. And I just want you. Oh, nothing else. No, nothing else. Nothing else will do. Lord, I just want you. Oh, nothing else. Lord, nothing else. Oh, Lord, nothing else will do. Oh, your and I just want to sit here at your feet. Come in this holy moment. You're number one. Jesus, you don't owe me anything. More than anything. Oh, I just want you. More than anything you can do. Lord, I just want you. Let's say, I just want you to say it together. I just want you and nothing else, and nothing else, and nothing else will do. I just want you and nothing else, Lord, nothing else, nothing else will do. Jesus, you don't owe me anything. More than anything that you can do. Oh, I just want you. Oh, more than anything you can do. Oh, I just want you. Lord, we thank you for your love. Lord, we thank you for this goodness. And even in these last few months, God, even through these last few weeks. And it's my hope and my prayer that this goodness and this faithfulness would shine through. That Christ would shine through. That your name would be known through all of the hurt, all of the struggle, through the death, the sickness, and the anger. Lord, that your hope would press forward. And we sing for that this morning. We do it in your name. Amen. Let's have a seat.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Dee. I'm pastor here. If you haven't met me yet or seen me, I never got used to preaching to a camera. And the problem was David was usually on the other side of the camera, which he was a little distracted anyway. So I apologize for that. Do you like the wood up there? How many of you are OCD enough that you've already decided that this design, check out if this design on this side is the exact same as this design on the other side? I did that when I walked in. David, we just had to figure out something to do to prove to you that we have been working for the last little while and running our place. So David designed all this and headed this all up, and a lot of people helped people that were free. So lots happened in the last 10 weeks. One of the things most of you know, my mother passed away in April from the coronavirus. My dad had it but he recuperated from it. He spent a couple days in the hospital, but Mom spent, I think, 23 days in intensive care and all of that stuff. So for those of you who knew her, those of you who want to, we're going to have a service here for her on June 27th, which is in 3 weeks. It's going to be at 11 o'clock on that Saturday, and there will be a meal in the gym. So I want to warn you, there's not going to be social distancing at that event. There's just going to be. So if you're still concerned about it, then just don't come, because there's going to be a lot of people here. And so then our family is going to leave and go back to Louisiana that Saturday afternoon. And we'll have a service in Louisiana at their church, back in the town where my mom was born and grew up and met Dad, and all that kind of stuff. They moved back there, and we'll have a service in that church on Sunday. So I'll miss that Sunday. But we're glad you're here. And thank you for everybody who wrote cards and sent notes and all that kind of stuff. Thankful that you're here. We're going to do this way for the next couple of weeks. Let me tell you, parents who have children in here, we invited your children here. So if they're a little noisy, that's fine. I was a youth minister for a long time. I can handle distractions. It's not going to distract me. But if your worst fears come true and one of your children goes slap absolutely crazy, don't take them outside and spank them, because they will associate that pain with my voice. And so the next time they come to church and hear my voice, they're going to, like Pavlov's dogs, they're going to start shaking and whimpering and crying and not even know why. You won't know why either. But so I'm just joking. I'm just making So lots happened, right? Coronavirus, financial stuff, everybody's world was changed, education for your children. We all had to adapt to that. We all have opinions about that. I don't know about the other school districts, but I'm proud of the Ford School District doing so much work so fast in giving our children an opportunity to have an education, even though everything changed. And it wasn't perfect, and we know that, and we certainly don't expect it. So, but the most recent thing that's happened is this racism thing, right? Racism has reared its ugly head again. So, this is going to be very, very interesting. It's also going to be very, very, it's going to be very heavy, but it's something that I feel like religious leaders in America have to talk about. We for one, cannot ignore this. And so let me tell you something interesting. 9 months ago, my brother is a pastor in Harrisonburg, Virginia. 9 months ago, he and 8 other pastors met, and they decided they wanted to preach all together at the same time out of the same book of the Bible, so that some of the churches in the city will be studying the same thing in the same community. And 9 months ago, they decided that in late spring and the summer, they would preach out of the book of James. Okay? Which makes it very interesting, the passage we're going to read this morning. Because I'm following my brother's sermons and his passages, and he preached this last week. And so I'm going to preach it today. And we've been going through the book of James, and it does not, what we're doing today does not require me to make any adjustments to my preaching schedule. This is the next set of verses that came up. And it was planned 9 months ago. God was prepared for this, and he was preparing his church for this. Because 13 days ago, on May 25th, George Floyd died unnecessarily. It was a bad thing. And if you haven't seen the video, and most of you have, if you haven't seen the video, you need to watch the video. Because you don't need to ignore it. It's sad. You watch a man die. You watch one man kill another man. And that's never good, and it's always wrong. The coincidence is that on that very same day, video surfaced of a black man who was bird watching in Central Park. His name was Christian Cooper. He went bird watching. He had been a bird watcher since he was a child. And he went to this part of Central Park. And in this part of Central Park in New York City, you're required to keep your pets on a leash. Well, there was a white woman there that had a dog, a Cocker Spaniel maybe, that wasn't on a leash. And he apparently, according to him and her, said, "Can you please put your dog on a leash?" And she went berserk. And you could see, I mean, if you watch this video, you need to watch this video too, you could see this video, it looked like her heart started beating faster, her blood pressure went up, she got very agitated. And she aggressively approached this man because he, at that point, started filming her. And Christian Cooper started filming her, and she said, "I'm calling the police." And he said, "Good." She said, "No, I'm calling the police to tell them that you just threatened my life and the life of my dog." He said, "But I didn't." She said, "I know, but I'm going to tell them that anyway." And later came to find out she got fired because of that. because this video went viral, because of what she did in this video that went viral. She rescinded what she said, and she said, he never said that to me. A clear case of racism. February 23rd, this video didn't come out until 2 months later. Ahmaud Arbery was jogging through a neighborhood, and two white men, he's a black man, and two white men, there have been some not vandalism, but debris on new construction. They just assumed that it was him. And so they got their guns, and they got in their vehicle, and they went and antagonized him and aggressively approached him, and he, defending himself, one of them shot him and killed him. Two white men and one black man. That's racism. In these kind of moments, we need God. And we need to know that God 9 months ago knew this was going to happen. And so there's 9 churches in Harrisonburg, Virginia, and this church that have preached this sermon about racism. And these are the verses that we're going to look at this morning. James chapter 1, verse 19, 20, and 21. James says, "Know this, my beloved brothers and sisters, let every person be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger. For the anger of mankind does not produce the righteousness of God. Therefore, put away all filthiness and rampant wickedness, and receive with meekness the implanted word, which is able to save your soul." Soren Kierkegaard was a philosopher a long time ago. He's a great man, very, very smart. But one of the smartest things he said was very, very plain. He said, when we read the Bible, we must always say, God is speaking to me. So this means this morning, if you read that on the screen, or if you heard my voice say it, God is telling you to be quick to listen, to be slow to speak, and slow to anger. Now, to be slow to anger for some of you means to control yourself, to curb your rage. You have an anger problem. Quit. Don't be quick to anger. Be slow to anger. But in some instances, like this one, it means something different. It means you should be slow to anger, but you should eventually arrive at anger over some things. For African Americans, this anger did not come quickly. There's been a very long buildup. For most of them, it's been all of their lives, the lives of all of their parents and grandparents and great-grandparents for 400 years. This is not quick anger because of 8 minutes on Monday, but it's a slow anger of the past 400 years. In 1967, Martin Luther King Jr. gave a speech at Stanford University to a group of very educated, very white, very elite men. And he entitled that speech, "The Other America." Now, this moment in history, and some of you are old enough to remember this, the civil rights movement was getting out of Martin Luther King Jr.'s control. It was splintering with the Black Power movement gaining influence with its agenda of violence. Martin Luther King Jr. always condemned violence. He said, "Rioting is bad. I always condemn the riots. Nonviolence is the only way. Violence is destructive to property, to people, and to yourself. And yet it is morally irresponsible to condemn the riots without also condemning the conditions which lead people to participate in riotous activities." And then he famously said, "A riot is the language of the unheard." Of people who are talking and they feel like they're not being listened to. This is your preschooler, right? When they're trying to put a square block into a round hole and they can't get it done, they just throw everything. They might throw them at you. Or this is when a preschooler is trying to express it and they don't have words. So they use their hands, they use their fists. And sometimes mama has your baby ever grabbed your face while you were holding him or her and turned your face. We have an example. And got you to look at them. A riot is the language of the unheard. People who are frustrated, they feel like nobody's listening. It's wrong to presume that this is unbiblical, hasty anger. So this is a complex subject. It's going to get a little more complicated. But there are at least 2 issues here, and they should not be confused. One issue is black deaths occurring too regularly. It just happens disproportionately too much. Not all of them are accidental, and not all of them are validated. The second issue is rising and looting. 2 separate issues, right? And so we can't dismiss the one because of the other. And I, for one, I'm sick of of the oppressors and the white people and black people both trying to change the subject away from the issue of racism. Racism is an issue of the heart. Your outside color has nothing to do with the character of your heart. Racism is real, and it's evil. And yes, there are white people who die. There are white deaths. But this country was largely built on slave labor. White people owned black people. And I know there are some other combinations of that, but by and large, white people owned black people. And that gives black deaths today a different context, and it requires a different conversation. It is not the same thing. God is speaking to you in verse 19. God is saying, become angry. It's time for people who have power to become angry. Martin Luther King Jr. narrows the focus down to this at one point. We find ourselves living in a vast ocean of material prosperity, yet millions find themselves perishing on a lonely island of poverty. And so we're going to talk about the financial disparities between black America and white America for just a minute. And that's not the only disparities, because this is why we're going to do it. Because there have been at least 3 systematic, organized, financial sins to the African American people after slavery. And before slavery, it was worse. This is the other America that white people largely have not experienced. So number one, the first of these systematic U.S. government, white people in power, sins. African Americans were excluded from the Homestead Act of 1862. Now, I know 1862 was before the Emancipation Proclamation, so before the slaves in the South were freed, but it's close enough that the largest part of the Homestead Act was enacted after the Emancipation Proclamation, so don't get caught up in that detail. The Homestead Act of 1862, pioneers in the West could buy 160 acres for a small fee, a small fee, after living on the land for 5 years, after improving the land, clearing it, growing it, and all that kind of stuff, unless you're black. Black people did not qualify for 160 acres of land, even if they improved it, even if they cleared it. Listen to this, 25% of the current U.S. population over the age of 25 has a legacy of property ownership that began in the Homestead Act of 1862. 25% of adults in here own land, not in the West, but we own a home and we own land partially attributable to the Homestead Act of 1862, but not if you're black. Owning land in your own home is the most solid way of building personal and generational wealth ever. And blacks were excluded. Number two, in the 20th century, from the 1930s to the 1960s, African Americans were shut out of the single greatest wealth-building initiative in our nation's history. The Federal Housing Authority, FHA-backed loans, FHA-backed mortgages. So if you wanted to buy a home, white or black, you could go to a bank and they could loan out the money that they had. If they loaned out too much of it, they had to stop. But with FHA, when the government started backing loans, they could say, we're out of money, but we know where we can get some money from the government at a lower interest rate than what we would loan it to you for. And so FHA-backed loans allowed millions and millions of people in the 30s through the 60s to build wealth. But due to a practice called redlining, you can look this up on Wikipedia or the Google, whatever. Banks refused to give FHA loans in neighborhoods that had a certain percentage of African Americans already living there. So they discriminated against blacks. And blacks were additionally excluded from white neighborhoods because of racism, because of fear, because of discrimination. The greatest wealth-building tool in our nation's history, to the largest number of people, African Americans were excluded from this. Number three, because of that, predatory lending practices against minorities. Because they couldn't get an FHA-backed loan, they were often offered something called a contract purchase, which basically means they did not purchase a home when they thought they were buying a house. They purchased a contract for when they purchased a home. So if you got a 30-year mortgage, you are actually buying a contract that at the last payment, the home would be yours if everything else was perfect. All the responsibility of home ownership. If your roof breaks, you have to fix it. If your air conditioner breaks, you have to fix it. If you get termites, you have to fix it. As the owner of the home. All the responsibility of ownership, but all the disadvantages of renting. So it's like renting a home that you don't own. You're not putting equity into it. You can't go get an equity loan on a contract purchase home. But you're not renting it because if there's any repairs to be made, you have to make them. The owner's not responsible for it. So you pay for your repairs. You can pay for your repairs and you can pay your mortgage note for 25 years. And if you are late or miss one payment, you lose everything. You're kicked out. By the way, this is interesting. You want to know what qualifies someone as a black person? Some of you know this. In Texas, if one of your great-grandparents was black, then you're black. 1/8. If 1/8 of your blood is black, then you're considered a black person. In Louisiana and in some other southern states, it's one great-great-grandparent. 1/16. If 1/16 of your blood is black, then you're not white with a little bit of black, you're considered black for these reasons. And we think this is ancient history. We think, oh, slavery ended in the 1800s. There's civil rights movements in the late 1900s. But this is an ancient history. Between 2000 and 2013, Wells Fargo and Bancorp South practiced race-based predatory lending and redlining in Memphis, Tennessee. They got caught. You see, this is now. Many African-American families can tell you personal stories like this. This is the life they know. These are the stories that their parents have told them and their grandparents told them because they lived through it. So what is the result of these three moves and others like the GI Bill? The GI Bill is one of the greatest things that the American government, if you come fight for us, when you get back, we'll pay for your education, we'll give you a low-interest loan. But not if you're black. Because if you're black, you go apply for a loan, they'll redline you, and they won't give you a loan. Or if you're black, your education is free, but what college is going to accept you? The result is this, that at one time in America, the median household wealth of white Americans, household wealth is not household income. It's if you liquefy everything. If you own a home and you sell it, and you make $100,000 on it, and you sell your cars, whatever value you have in your home. At one time, the median household wealth of white Americans was $171,000 per household. This is mom, dad, kids. At the same time, the median household wealth of black Americans was $17,500. That's a difference 10 times greater. You want to know when that was? 2016. It's 4 years ago. 153 years after the Emancipation Proclamation that says everybody is free. A primary reason for this is not intelligence. It's not a difference in work ethic. It's not a difference in sexual morality. It's the three reasons I just listed based on the color of skin. 243 years of chattel slavery, which means if you own a person, you can do the same thing to them that you do to cattle. That you own them. And then the Jim Crow era. And today, the mass incarceration of the black male, plus these economic depressions, plus educational inequalities, this is not a good name. Don't look at your television screen and think these people are overreacting. Be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. So let me take advantage of the privilege I have of being the pastor and being the only one speaking right now. Let me share with you 4 things that I've seen on social media that I said that they make me sick. I detest them. Number 1, do not dismiss racism by claiming you're not a racist. You know what that does? That makes this conversation about you and saying it's not your problem. Racism exists. It exists in this town. It exists in this country. And moving the discussion from racism to yourself is anti-intellectual, It's selfish, it's ungodly, and it's evil. Number 2, do not dismiss the protest by decrying the evil actions of looting and rioting. Protests work. Violence is destructive, but they are two different subjects. Two different things. You can't dismiss one because of the other. You can do both at the same time. You can support the protest, and you can condemn the violence. Number 3, do not say things like, you don't support Black Lives Matter because you believe that all lives matter. That's unchristian and it's ungodly. I'm going to show you why. Dismissing Black Lives Matter because some proponents of Black Lives Matter say only Black Lives Matter is the same false logic as dismissing protests because some protesters loot and riot. Black lives do matter. We don't believe that only Black lives matter, and most black people don't believe that only Black lives matter. But let me tell you something else. One time Jesus told a story about 100 sheep. And he said 99 sheep were saved and one was lost, and he left the 99 to go find the one. Not because he didn't love them all equally, but the one was the only one who needed him to go find him. That's the example Jesus said. All the sheep, but only one needed help at that moment. Number 4, don't shield your children from this. Your children need to know this is going on. Now, it needs to be age appropriate, right? And you as a parent need to know what an age appropriate explanation is. Julie saw a picture, not a meme, but a picture the other day on Facebook. 2 little boys who went to school together, had the same teacher, kindergarten, 1st grade. They both went to get a haircut, and they got the same exact haircut. They got a buzz cut so that they would confuse the teacher. So she couldn't tell them apart. One little boy was white, one little boy was black. They had no idea. Slow to anger means slow down to some people, but to many white Christians, it means now is the time to get angry. Begin to be quick to hear. Begin to be quick to listen. Have a conversation with your mouth closed for once. Have a conversation without putting your opinion on Facebook or social media or anything like that. It is not fair to get on Facebook and say, now, I'm about to say something. If you don't like it, just unfriend me. Because you wouldn't say that to a person standing in front of you. And it's not unfair to make those kind of threats and those kind of demands to do something that you wouldn't do in person. Because if one of your friends walks up to you and says, tell me your opinion on this, you wouldn't say to them, oh, I'm going to tell you my opinion, and if you don't like it, don't ever talk to me again. There are times when that's acceptable, but they're much more rare that's happening on Facebook these days. It's not enough to just be not racist. We have to be actively anti-racist. Verse 20 says, for the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. Which just means when you do get angry, be careful. Righteousness in the New Testament, that word is the same word as the New Testament word for justice. It's the same concept in the Old Testament, especially the minor prophets, the small books toward the end of the Old Testament. This is what the Lord does require of me, to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with my God. It's all through the Bible. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 26 says, be angry and do not sin. It's okay to be angry sometimes. And it's not okay sometimes to not be angry. Jesus got very angry one day at his fellow Israelites at church. He walked into the church and he scattered everybody. He often got angry, mostly at the religious leaders of the day. He hardly ever got angry at people who weren't following him. Racism is worth your anger, and racists are worth your love. Verse 21, therefore put away all filthiness and rampant wickedness and receive with meekness the implanted word which is able to save your soul. So what does James call filthy? What does he consider to be filthy and wicked? Those are two strong words. He's talking about the violence and the sin that comes out of anger. But also, he's talking about a lack of appropriate anger. So the question then becomes, how do we become justifiably angry, but not let that anger become illogical or irrational or sin? Well, he says two things. Put away all filthiness and rampant wickedness. violence with fists or with words is filthy and wicked to God. Dismissing your role in anti-racism is filthy and wicked. That means if you are not anti-racist, if you're not there's another way of saying if you're not anti-sin, specifically with regard to racism, then God considers it filthiness and wickedness. The second thing, receive with meekness the implanted word. You know, some people we take advice from with meekness, and some people we don't. Usually our spouse is not with meekness. We kind of present that sometimes, but like with our grandparents who were wise and all that. This means with meekness and understanding that God is more intelligent than you. God is more experienced than you, and He's more right than you more of the time. All of the time. God's way is always the best way. God's laws are always for a better life. To receive with meekness means to accept His teaching, if you understand it correctly, without debate, without talking back. You can ask questions of God to help clarify, but not to debate. You see, this is the way. Today is a day of a lot of coincidences. June 7th of 2012 was my first sermon here as pastor for my part church. And it was a two-part sermon that day and the 14th. And what I talked about a vision for our future. And I've been saying the same thing for 7 years. God put this church and this community to change this world. And this is one of the times that we're being called to that action as a church. I don't know how to get racism, but I know all of us together can do it better than one of us alone. And we can do it better united than divided. And if the church doesn't do it, who's going to do it? One more verse. Genesis chapter 1, verse 27, very first chapter of the Bible. God created mankind, all God, in His own image. In the image of God, He created him. Male and female, He created them. You have not ever laid eyes on any color of skin that was not an image bearer of His Creator. You have never seen anybody. They may not be good at it, but they were created in the image of God. Red, yellow, black, and white. I know that's probably inappropriate, politically incorrect, but that's how the song goes, right? This is why God left us on this earth. Eternal life isn't about just going to heaven. If it was, we would go there. But if you're a follower of Christ, you have to get angry at some things, and racism as well. Let's pray together and have some instructions for you. God, give us the courage, give us the wisdom to be more like You. Give us the ability to see different colors of skin, but honor all of them. You didn't ask us to be colorblind. You asked us to see the diversity of your power. You painted each of our lives. God, let Fairmont Park Church be a leader in this way. In Jesus' name I pray.
Lord bless you and keep you, and make His face shine upon you, be gracious to you. Lord, turn His face on you and be gracious to you. Lord, turning face toward you and give me. And
person.